For centuries, Christian churches have hidden pedophiles, fraudsters and psychopaths, all the while telling the rest of us how to live. Now these churches want their bigotry and mindless hate to be protected by law. No institution should be allowed to operate under different laws than the rest of us. That was a letter to the editor in the newspaper on Monday of this week about Andrew Thorburn, the Essendon CEO who lasted just 27 hours in that role before he was outed as being the chairman of a church that teaches homosexual activity to be sinful and abortion to be murder. The difference between Thorburn and, say, an Israel Folau is that Thorburn didn't say anything about abortion or homosexuality. In fact, when he was the CEO of the National Australia Bank, he approached the AFL to suggest the establishment of a pride round. But just the fact that Thorburn is formally associated with a church that holds traditional Christian views on life, marriage and family was enough to get him fired. The club didn't even bother hiding its decision nor couching it in euphemistic terms. A statement was posted on its website confirming that Andrew Thorburn was told by the club's board to choose between his church and his job. Club president told media that they weren't allowed to ask about his religion during the interview process because that would be discrimination. But as soon as they found out, they acted. Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews called the view that homosexual acts were sinful and abortion was murder appalling, hateful bigotry, and said that Christians who aspire to leadership roles should perhaps be kinder and more tolerant. Victoria's Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commissioner, Ro Allen, whose job it is to uphold the human rights of Victoria's citizens, including the right to freedom of religion, congratulated the club for standing by its values. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is yet to comment on the matter, and while opposition leader Peter Dutton said that Thorburn should be reinstated, he also condemned the teachings as an abomination. While Thorburn had the resources to choose his church over his job, we know that many others don't and are forced to be silent about their faith out of fear that they will find themselves unemployed and even unemployable. Given this is the current state of play, what chance is there for evangelization? How can we speak about the truth of the gospel and of our faith in Jesus Christ in a society where admitting that we are of the Christian faith can risk our livelihoods? Are the so-called culture wars such an impediment to evangelization that we should all just pack up and go home? Well, I know none of you believe this is true, because if you did, you wouldn't be at this conference on a Saturday afternoon. You'd be doing literally anything else. And I actually might be an optimist because I think that the culture wars might even assist in our efforts of preaching the gospel. So what I'd like to do this afternoon is offer 10 quick thoughts on evangelization in the public square, why it's important, how to do it charitably, and how to do it effectively. So I'm going to just quickly share my screen, if I can manage to do that maybe with Ryan's help. Hold on. Sorry, I think I did that the wrong way around. I think I share screen first, I know, Ryan. Okay. So my first thought is that we can be confident that God put you in this time period for a reason. It's no accident that each and every one of you is alive and active in the church at this time. God knew what he was doing. He knew the challenges that would be facing the church and the world at this period of time. And it was into this particular moment that he not only brought you into existence, but gave you the gift of faith and the desire to evangelize. If we're confident that this much is true, we can also be confident that God will give us the graces we need for this moment, and that we don't have to be afraid that the culture is against us. The same question posed to Esther is posed to each of us today. Who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? My second thought is that the church's teaching on life, marriage, gender, and sexuality is actually good news. We can fall into the trap of being apologetic for the church's teaching on hot button issues. we can start to believe what many non-Catholics and even many Catholics tell us, that the teachings are outdated and unwelcome and have no place in modern society. Many of us decide, either consciously or unconsciously, that the church is better off being silent about these issues. We suggest instead that we focus all our attention on those things where the world agrees with the church: unemployment and homelessness, migrants and refugees, Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islander peoples, environmental stewardship, and more. And while each of these issues is important and worthy of our attention, we can risk believing that these parts of the church's teachings, and only these parts, are the good news, while the rest of it is the unfortunate extra that we have to keep, but we also hope no one really notices, like the old uncle who gets drunk at family events and starts saying inappropriate things. But the truth is that the church's teaching on life and marriage, gender and sexuality, is good news. It's part of God's plan for humanity, for our flourishing, for living life to the full, as Jesus tells us in Luke's Gospel. Marriage is a lifelong union between a man and a woman, open to life, and with the aim of bringing all to heaven, is the solution to many of the troubles that people experience in family life. Similarly, the protection of human life from conception to natural death speaks to the inherent dignity of each and every human person. It confirms that they are unique, that they are individually and unconditionally loved, and that they are worth protecting, that there is no such thing as a person being unwanted. And this is especially good news in a world that increasingly seeks to cancel people as soon as they commit a social crime. Let me offer an example, which was also in the news on Monday of this week. And the story was about a graduation mass for a girls' school in Hobart, that's going to be held this coming Tuesday. And it just so happens that the readings of the day for this Tuesday include the infamous text from Ephesians. You know, the one that goes, "Be subject to one another out of reverence to Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and sacrificed himself for her." So someone posted it on Twitter, and of course, outrage ensued. How could such a disrespectful and inappropriate reading be chosen for the Mass? The Twitter warriors asked. And yes, we all know that readings at weekday Masses can be replaced for the occasion. And in this case, Archbishop Porteous suggested the readings for today's feast of St. John Paul II instead. So it was no big drama by any measure, but the ire that was drawn against the readings for the day, even from some Catholics, suggests a little of the attitude I was talking about before. We can fall into the trap of behaving that some parts of sacred scripture are not good news and have no place in 21st century Australia. The truth we know is that the church's teaching, sacred scripture, all of it is good news and good for those who hear it and live by it. We need to believe this to be true with all of our hearts and also proclaim it to be true if we're going to be true evangelists during this time. And my third thought is that we can be confident that some people will be attracted by the truth. We know that many people discover God through the transcendentals, the true, the good, and the beautiful. Of course, people are drawn to God through beauty, whether it's the beauty of the natural world that provides its own testimony to the existence of a creator, or through the sacred art and architecture of the church, or through sacred music that lifts our minds and our hearts, our entire spirits to God. We know that so many others are drawn to faith through goodness, through the warmth and welcome and charitable outreach of so many of the faithful. And while these bring many to God, there are still some who will also be attracted to God and to the Catholic Church because of their love for the truth, and that search for truth leads them firmly into the church. And I would probably count myself as one of these so-called intellectual converts. My choice for faith as an adult came through learning more about what the church teaches, particularly on contentious issues. And when convinced that the church's position on these were true, my commitment to the Catholic Church itself strengthened. I'll give you another story from my own experience. A few years ago, before COVID, before COVID, I was at a drinks night for Life Choice, a pro-life university ministry, and I was approached by a young woman. She told me that she'd attended a panel discussion a year before held on the university campus that I was a part of for Life Week. They hold Life Week on the university campus every year. And she said that she had come along as a protester, but was so attracted by some of the arguments from the panel that she found herself a year later at a pro-life event and starting to attend some of the Catholic chaplaincy events. Some people will discover God through their search for what is true. And so as the church, we must continue to proclaim the truth in season and out of season. Similar to my third point, my fourth tip is that we can also be confident that standing strong is attractive. People are attracted to courage, and some people will be evangelized because they're attracted to the church taking a prophetic position on an issue, even when the majority of public opinion is standing against them. In my own work in public engagement, I can tell you that those of other denominations and even those of other faiths have a deep respect for and even a deference to the Catholic Church when it comes to social issues. I've seen many other faith leaders wait until the Catholic bishop takes a position, or at least they'll make a phone call to check what the Catholic position will be before they respond to a certain social issue, because how the Catholic Church behaves and what it teaches will influence their decision. Also, those who are already firm in their faith draw strength for their own personal engagement in the public square when they see their leaders step out in courage and in faith. The prophetic voice of the Catholic Church can assist in our evangelization efforts because it offers strength to those who might be worried about finding their own voice. My next thought might seem a little contradictory to what I've said already, but I don't think it is. And that's that not everyone is called to be a culture warrior, nor is every battle in the culture war a good opportunity for evangelization. My role as a public affairs and engagement advisor is to assist in campaigning and government relations on various political matters, which means I find myself in the middle of euthanasia, abortion, and other debates all the time. And you'll often hear me saying at work that I'm not part of the Sydney Centre for Evangelisation for good reason, because it's my job to stand at the gate with a cricket bat and beat back attacks on things like religious freedom so that others in the church can get on with the business of evangelisation. I'm supposed to get out of the way of clergy and other ministries of the church, and also to keep those who want to remove the church from the public square out of their way as well. And I say it in jest, and it's only kind of half true. Indeed, we know that every Christian is called to evangelise. None of us are off the hook. But not all of us have the same contribution. Yes, my role is to engage in the so-called culture wars because it's important that the church fights bad laws and policies in order to uphold the common good. But your role might be not to speak about them at all. The trick in this is humility and discernment and prudence. Humility to be honest about your gifts and the gifts of others. Discernment to know where you're called to use your gifts to build up the kingdom. And prudence to know when to use them. My next tip is that personal testimony works. So we're often told that a key to evangelization is our own story. That if we're serious about bringing others to Christ, then we should be confident enough to give our own testimony, to speak about Jesus Christ and how he's touched our lives and continues to work in us. And I think the same is true when dealing with the difficult hot button issues. It's our personal stories that are most compelling. I'll give an example when it comes to one contentious issue, the seal of confession. So we all lived through the Royal Commission and the focus on the church during that time. And one aspect of divine law that drew a lot of attention and a lot of scorn was the seal of confession, partly because it's so foreign to the culture. How do you argue in favour of preserving the seal of confession when the person quizzing you is arguing that it puts children in danger? And there are many ways to tackle this question, and it's been spoken about by others. But I always think that personal experience is a good way to tackle it. So I'll say to someone, look, I don't know what your impression of the sacrament of confession is, but let me tell you about it from where I sit. Confession isn't a place where I go to hide or to keep secrets. It's actually the opposite. It's a place I go to be honest, to take off all the masks and to stop making excuses for my behaviour, to stop blaming other people and instead to own up for what I've done. Far from hiding the truth, it's the place where the truth is most exposed. And that's why it has the power to do so much good, because the regular practice of confession makes me less likely to do bad things because I'm going to have to face up to them. Confession makes me a better person than I would be without it. So yes, I'm still arguing in favour of the preservation of the seal, but I'm doing it from personal experience, which someone can't dismiss so easily. And it also gives me the opportunity to testify about the goodness of the sacrament. Tip number 7, don't get locked into a binary choice. So in a similar way to using the contentious issues to speak about the truth and goodness and beauty of the sacramental life, we can also use them to speak about the Church's vision for humanity. Often those who don't really understand why the Church teaches as she does on issues of life and family present us with a binary choice that isn't true. You believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, therefore you hate gay people. You don't think people should be allowed to change their gender, so you want trans kids to take their own lives. You're pro-life, which means you want women who have been abandoned by their partners and who can't afford to have a child to have one anyway, and so on. And I'm stealing a little bit from Father Mike Schmitz here, but he talks about the third way that's offered by the Church. Take the example of abortion. I remember hearing a university student give the following scenario. So imagine a fellow student falls pregnant and her partner tells her that he will leave her if she doesn't have an abortion. This uni student argued that by denying this woman the choice to abort, the Catholic pro-life position would force her to drop out of university and to try to raise a child as a single mother on social security payments. But we need to challenge perceptions like that, because that's not the Church's view for life and marriage and family. The Church's vision of marriage and family life would see the father and mother married and committed to each other and to raising children together. And that even if this wasn't the case, that the man would take responsibility for the mother and the unborn child and care for them. Failing that, the family of the woman would surround her and support her to continue her education. Then the Church, then the broader community would also assist, and only as a final backstop is where the state gets involved. The Catholic vision isn't about denying choice, but by allowing women to make choices much more freely because they know they have the support of so many rings of people around them. Tip number 8 is to remember joy. If we're going to speak about hot button issues in the public square, we have to be joyful about it. So I said earlier that we have to believe that the Church's teaching, all of it is good news and good for those who hear it. And we also need to show this by living it joyfully in our own lives. Father Pierre Teilhard de Chardin famously said that joy is the infallible sign of the presence of God. His brother Jesuit, Pope Francis, puts it a little more bluntly and tells us that an evangelizer must never look like someone who's just come back from a funeral. Just last week, he said that those with funeral faces aren't Christians. But this joy doesn't and can't just apply to popular teachings, to gentle Jesus, meek and mild. We must also be able to speak of the joy of the difficult teachings and living by the difficult teachings as well. So another example I can give is about the role of women in the Church. So we can talk about the theology of an all-male priesthood if we like, but sometimes, particularly as women, it's just easier if we speak about the joy we find in being a woman in the Church. I like to speak about how full my own life is, how that I don't think for a second that I'm being deprived of the opportunity to make a full contribution to the Church simply because I'm not a priest. Joy makes all the difference. Another thing that makes a lot of difference is mercy. And that, I think, is our biggest asset. In a culture that's increasingly hostile to Christianity, I think we need to be speaking about mercy more than ever. The message of mercy that the Catholic Church offers is a great tool for evangelization, and we shouldn't be talking about any of the hot button contentious issues without also reminding people of the mercy of God for those who fall short. Cancel culture tells us that if you cross the line once, you're cancelled. Your reputation and position in society can never be restored. But Catholics have the opposite. We have the opposite message. We say your reputation can be restored. You can be accepted back into society again, and you should be. In our current cancel culture, there is no answer. It's only the Catholic Church that extends true mercy, that tells somebody that full restoration is possible. So if the world is super quick to cancel, I think mercy will be our biggest point of difference in the modern age. And my final tip is that we don't do it alone. When it comes to other aspects of evangelization, we're constantly reminded that Jesus sent the disciples out in pairs. So the same is true for engaging in the public square, particularly on contentious issues. It's not something we should do alone because it can be very daunting. So if you're going to step out in this area, make sure you have people with you. And on the flip side, if you see somebody out there engaging, never leave them alone on the battlefield. Where possible, we should be coming to the aid of a friend who's out there on the public square. So they're my 10 tips, gleaned largely from my own experience in being on this particular part of the mission field over the last decade or so. But now I'd be keen to hear from you all about whether they resonate, whether you have any others to add, and of your experience, and of any questions you have about engaging in the public square.